How to grieve consciously. Discover the keys to transforming pain into evolution and growth. Welcome back to the Path of Purpose podcast with Dr. Katja Rusanen. In today's episode, we are exploring another inspiring journey, offering expert tips to help you live your purpose. Are you ready to be inspired? I'm thrilled to introduce our guest, Tara Nash, who is the author of the Conscious Grieve book. Tara works as a conscious grief guide with individual clients. She also teaches grief yoga, Kundalini yoga, and breath work to help clients move grief through the body. She facilitates an 11-week group course called Conscious Grief Program, an opportunity to sit in community and learn about the grief process. And in this interview, Tara will share how you can grieve consciously. So stay tuned. So welcome, Tara. I'm super excited to have you here.
Well, it's really lovely to be here with you, Katja. So thank you very much for the invitation.
And let me ask first, and this is a question I always ask, was there a special event that led you to this path?
Well, yes, is the short answer. And you and I met 10 years ago when we started the program Spiritual Psychology in California, in Los Angeles. And when I started that 2-year master's, I didn't know that I would end up on death and grieving, but I felt like I knew I wanted to change my career. I had been in fashion, living in London, and I was feeling like this was really out of alignment with who I was. And I knew that I had this feeling that I wanted to do something in the field of helping other people. And I had started doing therapy. I had done self-development workshops. And I had started to, in those, talk about the death of my parents. But it wasn't until the second year of studying spiritual psychology, as you know, because that's, the program you did as well. In the second year, we were able to choose a project of our choice. And at the time, I was thinking about, I would love to learn Spanish. I would love to, learn more about yoga. And it took us a while, didn't it, to kind of decide what we were going to base these projects on. And 3 different people on separate occasions suggested that I go and speak to one of the facilitators, Paula Majewski. So because 3 separate people on different occasions, I thought, okay, I must listen to that and book a session with Paula. And I had never spoken to her one-to-one before. And she was the person that said to me, I think you need to base your second year project on the death of your father. And honestly, after speaking to her, I kind of thought, I wish I hadn't have spoken to her, because that sounds like,
I don't want this.
yeah, I was like, that doesn't sound like a very fun thing to think about for a whole year. And some people were choosing really,
I know.
light stuff. So after I sort of let this kind of sink in for a few days, and then I thought to myself, actually, I always want to talk about death, but not many other people do. So maybe this could be actually a very interesting topic. And then it started to kind of run in my mind, and I was like, actually, yeah, this is a project I would like to do. And one of the ways of sort of researching was to reach out to people in my community and say, would you be willing to talk about your experience? And you were one of those people that very generously said you would talk to me. So interviewing people was one of these ways that I was researching. And it was so profound because multiple people shared that they'd never really had the space to talk about these incredibly painful, but also transformative experiences in their life of losing somebody dear to them. Because in our normal day-to-day life, we don't really ask people questions about the people that they've lost that are close to them. And I started to actually read books about grief for the first time and write about my parents. And I was thinking, I can't believe that I hadn't done this before. I can't believe that this is actually the first time I've picked up books about grief. And I can't believe that no therapist and coach had ever really told me what grief was and how it could impact me. Because in my mind, grief was something we experience in, the weeks and months after somebody dies. And my parents had died, decades before. So, because my father died when I was 9 years old, very suddenly of a heart attack. And then my mother died of breast cancer 11 years later. And by this stage, while I was at USM, I was in my early 30s. And it was so profound because I just thought, well, I haven't really grieved my parents. I've been holding it all in for such a long time. And the experience of being away from home, in a different country and having the time and space allowed me to consciously grieve my parents for the first time. And that was so profound. And I thought to myself, well, I feel like I was so uneducated about what grief was and how it can impact us that I felt like, oh, I did not expect to come to do spiritual psychology and land on this, but that felt like I had found my purpose. And that's what I felt that I, wanted to base my new career on.
And you are doing such a beautiful work in the world. So I really love this because as I have gone through grief as well in my own life. So I know the importance of the work that you do and how you support them. Because what you also mentioned is that there is this avoidance. We don't want to talk about it. So why do you think we are grief avoidant we have that grief avoidance in our culture?
Well, I think that a lot of it goes down to history and the Industrial Revolution. And Freud did research and, published papers about how, people needed to just move on from the death of a loved one. And that sort of suited the time of history because it was about productivity and efficiency and getting back to work and not wallowing and being sad and, processing things for a long time. So that was instilled in the culture, and we still are very much like that. We don't like things that are uncontrollable and messy and take time, because we are in this sort of fast pace, obsessed with efficiency and continuing in life. So we've not really been taught to like slow down and to feel. And many people find other people's pain very, very uncomfortable. And so we're not really taught to just allow ourselves to feel the pain. It's like a lot of the messages we get are be brave, carry on, don't cry over spilt milk. We get a lot of praise for not showing emotion. And therefore our grief can get pushed down and repressed, and that doesn't bode well for the future because it doesn't go away. It just waits until our consciousness is ready to feel it.
Mm-hmm. Totally, and totally agree on because I tested that, like trying to push it away, like let me not deal with that. And then there came a time when I was more ready and also had the support to do the process and allowing myself to heal. So let me ask this because I feel the passion and I feel the dedication that you have for this work. So, why is that? Why are you so passionate about educating people on this conscious grief?
Well, I realized that because I had, I was very young when my father died, and it was a real shock. And I went into numbness, and I didn't know how to, talk about my feelings. And, at 9 years old, most people are not so articulate in that way. But I felt that I, started to build very sort of strong walls around my heart because I was just getting ready for the next traumatic event. Um, I feel that my mother, she actually got into another relationship very quickly after my father died. And then that was not a good relationship. So then she ended up getting divorced. So she had that grief. And then she had a grief from, we had to sell our family business, which was her father's business. So in the family, her whole life. And so that was a big grief for her. And then she just was always wanting to meet somebody and fall in love and have the same sort of relationship that she'd had with my father, and it just didn't happen. And she was very I think she was quite unhappy, and she had not processed her grief. She was pushing it down. She was very busy woman all the time, and yeah, sort of always on to the next thing. And then she got breast cancer, and Louise Hay talks about breast cancer being a lack of self-nurturing.
Mm.
And I feel that was so relevant in her case because she was very good at looking after her sort of outward appearance. But back then in the 90s, we didn't know so much about the importance of self-care, about looking after our inner world and our mental, psychological, spiritual selves. And so then I couldn't help always think about the breast cancer. Like, why did she get breast cancer? Because she was very healthy
Yeah.
in terms of diet and exercise, but she wasn't really healthy on an emotional level because she didn't allow herself to consciously grieve. So that's one part of it, like, and how we need to take care of ourselves. But from a personal perspective, when I started to consciously grieve, when I stopped being afraid to sort of lean into the pain, and I became more in touch with my feelings, and the spiritual psychology is all about peeling back the layers so we can become, more acquainted with our authentic selves, which is love. So that was a very heart-opening experience. And therefore, the more that I embraced my grief and allowed myself to feel it, the more I was able to tap into the feelings of joy and excitement and feeling grateful for my life, which I hadn't been for many, many years. And so the conscious grief allowed me to live a more fulfilled and joyous life.
So beautiful, and I can relate to that. And I want to go back into one thing that you mentioned, because grief, we also a lot of times maybe think this is for if you lose a loved one, but you mentioned also losing business as your mother's experience. So, can you talk a little bit of that? Because sometimes maybe we feel if we go through different type of losses in our lives that, oh, I should get over this because
Yeah.
it wasn't that bad then. So, if you have any insights there.
Yeah, I really appreciate you asking this question, because we do normally associate the word grief with the death of a person. But grief is felt with any big loss or change. So it could be, as I said about losing, selling the business, it could be moving country. It could be your children leaving home, or a friend that you've fallen out with. Because grief is this pool of emotions that we feel when something happens that we have an attachment or a bond to, and we really don't often acknowledge that and feel into it. And like you say, sometimes we can say to ourselves, oh, I shouldn't be upset about that, and I felt that even over the death of my parents. I think, as a way of dealing with it and being resilient, I would just always say to myself, you have a good life. A lot of other people have far worse things happen to them. You are fine. But in doing that, it's sort of a skill in one sense, because it helps you move forward and get on with life. But in another sense, it blocks you from feeling. And I didn't even acknowledge like what big trauma that was in my life for many, many years. So it was because I was like just getting through life rather than really like living life. And when we allow ourselves, so yes, those are, big losses, but we can also have other things in our life that make us feel really a lot of pain. And it could be something like losing weight or gaining weight. It could be our health.
Yeah.
It could be, our pets who are sick, or our pets who have passed away. There's really, grief is in so many parts of our lives. And I just want people to understand that more and be like, it's okay to feel all these difficult feelings that we don't want to feel, because we're human beings and we're feeling beings, and it's important. And the problem is, when we have so much comfort in our lives these days, so that could, because we live in warm homes with hot showers, and we have, can eat whatever we want, many of us, whenever we want, that whenever a feeling of discomfort comes, we're not very good at just sitting with it. And our immediate reaction can often be to get something to change the feeling. So that might be opening the fridge and eating. It could be pouring a glass of wine. It might be going to the doctor and getting something prescribed. There's so many different ways as well that we can change the feelings. And we're just not taught to stay with them. And often that's why it's really helpful to work with a coach or a facilitator, a therapist, somebody who can sit with us and be with us in those painful feelings. Because obviously a lot of friends, they want to be around the kind of sunny side up version of Katja or Tara for the good times. And we don't often want to burden our friends with those hard feelings. And that's why finding support groups or finding professionals is really important, to be with our hard feelings.
I really appreciate you sharing that, because it's also, we have maybe the persona that we normally are, and then finding some place where you can actually deal with your stuff, because you might be the supporter in the relationships that you have built, but finding way that you can also get support. So I think that's beautiful, and that's part of the work that you do so beautifully in the world. And your dedication is remarkable, because you also have just published a book, your first book, and I know how much time and effort creating and writing a book takes. So congratulations. So can you share a little bit more about your book?
Yes, will gladly. Thank you. So I have my copy here. So it just arrived. and it's called Conscious Grief, Transforming Pain into Evolution and Growth. And this book follows, each chapter is a week of the Conscious Grief program that I created, which is an 11-week group coaching program. And I also have produced, similar to this, series of interviews called the Conscious Grief series. So I had a lot of stories from people that I'd interviewed. So the book, it follows, a little bit of my story, a little bit of some grief theories, other people's experiences. And then in the back, at the end of each chapter, are some writing prompts for people to follow. So it's it's a 9-chapter book, and it's quite nice and short and easy to read, because those are the sorts of books I think when we're grieving are much easier to absorb. And I will be also doing an audio version as well, because I know that people find these days audio, much easier to listen to rather than read. So that will be coming soon.
Beautiful. And you will find the link to the book in the show notes too. And now, if you had one thing to share with the audience, how to assist themselves in the grief, what would you say? What could be the first step for them to do?
Well, I think that, in the very acute stages of grief, it can be the very simple, remember to eat, breathe, and sleep. And our nervous system is going to be completely, out of sorts. And sometimes just doing some deep belly breaths, placing both hands on your belly, inhaling slowly through the nose, and then gently exhaling through the mouth. And remembering that when you inhale, your belly actually expands when you breathe properly. And then when you exhale, the navel comes towards the spine. And just maybe taking the time to do 3 deep breaths, because when we're grieving, it's very shallow, our breath, and grief is held on our lungs. So practice some deep breaths to get more oxygen into your body. And if you don't have a self-care practice already, now it's like a necessity to find a daily practice. If it's not exercise and eating well, if you can begin journaling or something like that, or meditating, but just remembering that you need to start to look after yourself, because grief it's not just a mental and an emotional thing. It's a physical and spiritual thing too. And we need to really remember to take care of ourselves while we grieve.
Beautiful. That's a great way to start that process. And I know you are there to support those who want to have additional help on the way. And now you have given us a lot to think about. And I know you also put together a special gift for my community to take what we have been talking about here today and go deeper with you, have an experience with you. So, can you share a little bit about that?
Yes, thank you, Katja. So I teach Kundalini yoga, grief yoga, and breath work, because I'm very grateful to yoga to have been a big assistance in my life. And I think it's so important for us to move the grief out of our bodies. So this is a Kundalini yoga class, a 45-minute class, which restores a sense of balance. So that's the gift for the listeners and the viewers today.
Beautiful, because that's also a self-care. So if you want to start the self-care routine, this could be that step for you. So I put the link on the comments as well there. So check the show notes. And now as we start wrapping up here, do you have a special message that you would like to share?
I would like to say to people that if you can stay in connection with other people, And maybe it's just one other person that you feel comfortable to reach out to. Or maybe you're going to find a community, or perhaps you do have a great friend group of friends who you can call on for help, and not be afraid to ask people for help, because it can be a very isolating thing, grief, and it can be very, very difficult for many of us to ask for help. But as you know, asking for help is a spiritual practice as well. And so encouraging people to not, you don't have to do all of this alone, and that you can ask for help.
Yes. Thank you so much, Tara, for sharing your valuable insights today and all the work that you do in the world. And if you found this interview helpful, please give it thumbs up and subscribe to my channel for more inspiring content. And don't forget to check the previous episodes too. And I'm sending you lots of light, lots of love. Bye for now.
Thank you, Katja. Bye, everyone. Thank you.